and welcome back. I'm Amanda.
I'm Jordana.
I'm Ashley.
I'm Neil, and we watched Flight, directed by Robert Zemeckis. Well, I mean, just like it's just so stressful. This whole movie was too stressful for me to be able to enjoy it.
I was literally in bed, like with my blankets like this, just like, please don't die, please don't die.
I think anything with planes. Have you guys ever seen We Are Marshall?
Mm-mm.
No.
So We Are Marshall is based on a true story about this football team who went on a flight, and it crashed, and half of the team didn't go on the plane for whatever reason. And I watched that at a young age, and it like scarred me. So any plane movie, I'm always on the edge of my seat, and I always get so anxious because I always feel like everyone's just gonna die. And Lost and Grays, oh gosh.
This movie was nothing like what I was expecting at
Me
all.
neither. Have you guys seen or heard of that movie Sully with Tom Hanks?
Yes, I was gonna
Well,
bring that up.
I've seen like a little, like half of it. I didn't really care for it that much because that was kind of boring. But like, I thought it was gonna be like one of those. I was like, okay, it's another like flight hero movie, whatever. And then it opens with, how it opened with him in the hotel room and the naked lady, and I was like, whoa, this is not what I was expecting to be happening right now. And then comes the plane crash, and I'm like, oh my god, this is not at all what I was expecting to be happening right now. Yeah.
Ugh.
Oh my god. This movie did a really good job of making you feel absolutely shocked and terrified when people died, even though you don't know them. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Like usually you have to like do like development or whatever, but when they were like dragging him out and you saw what's her name, Trina's body, and like her head was like in like the duct or whatever, I was like, oh my god, this is horrifying.
I think it was because
Even though I don't know who these people are yet, you know.
I think it was because it was such a realistic fear of a lot of people. Like anytime you
Yeah.
go on a plane, you don't really, obviously, you don't expect it to crash, and you know that driving is a lot less safe than flying. But especially for generations above us who were like experiencing 9/11, like there's genuine fear that something will happen regardless of where you're going, or if it's like in this movie a 50-minute flight, like you really never know what can happen.
But it's like mid-flight scene, you get this random white lady and her heroin addiction, and I was just like,
Yeah,
so
Nicole.
a whole thing going down over here. Why are we still seeing this random white girl that I don't know anything about?
At first I thought she was the ex-wife, and I was like, no, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah, I thought that too. I was like, that doesn't really add up. That
Yeah.
doesn't.
Her in the beginning, I was just like, why'd y'all put her in this? What's the reason for this heroin addict? What does she have to do with the story? I see nothing. And then all of a sudden, you see the plane just flying upside down above her, like overdosed, and I'm like, what? What's
Because
going
she
on?
wasn't even awake for it. I thought she died, and I was like, that's why I was like, what's the point of having her in there? Because I was like, you really just put this woman in to show her OD? That's so weird. But then obviously it all came together.
I also think what's interesting is she did end up coming back and like having an important role. But I honestly wonder, like, if she just hadn't been in the movie, would it really have changed anything?
No.
Because that's like one of the, it's like not the Bechdel test, but that's one of them where like if you like replace the woman with like an inanimate object, like would the movie actually change? And I feel like honestly, like I get that she was like his motivator to do better,
No, she was
but
not.
I feel like,
she
yeah,
wasn't.
like
I
she
think,
just was there.
and her just leaving was so anticlimactic. I was kind of just like, there's really nothing that's going to happen other than you just going away. And even at the end of the movie, where we see all those pictures of her in the cell, that I felt like could have had a deeper connection if she did something else in the movie that had a more like climactic scene, or even just feelings that could have given the viewer some kind of deeper connection to her. But it was just difficult for me to even see the importance of her in Whip's life too.
Yeah, I didn't feel like any connection between her and Whip, and then all of a sudden they were kissing. I was like, what is this? There is no chemistry here. I see nothing.
Well, and even when he was being questioned, he was like, all that really matters to me is my family. And he didn't even mention her, right? When he was talking to the other cellmates. And then we go to the cell and he has pictures of Nicole. So at first, once that scene came around, he was talking to his cellmates. I thought she was just this random ex-girlfriend that, you know, he had a fling with only because he was so messed up with his addiction. But I guess not.
I guess in a way Nicole like did motivate him to do better, but we didn't see that development, so it didn't feel like anything at the end. I felt more about those passengers that died in the first 30 minutes than her.
It was an interesting choice that we never saw him interact with any of the families or anything. Because I kept waiting for that to happen. Like we see him interact with the co-pilot's wife, but I kept waiting for that to be an interaction that he would have with someone who was a family member of someone that died or something like that. Because I feel like that could have also served as a sort of wake up moment for him if he was talking to someone that was like, you are responsible, not responsible for, but kind of responsible for the death of someone I loved. I feel like that could have been his motivator, and they just didn't choose to include that.
Especially because his family, obviously they showed his family, but the only scene where we realize what the real picture of him and his family are is when he goes to his ex-wife's house and he has that episode with his son. So I also wish they kind of could have given us either a better introduction of their past or just some kind of a better idea of what his relationship was like with his family before that, because that was quite ahead in the movie.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about any specific love it or list it's?
I wouldn't say it's a love it, but I feel like the director is kind of pushing their religion at me. The entire time they're like, God this, God that, and I'm sitting here like, okay, I grew up Catholic and all, but y'all ain't got to be bringing this up right now, not in this movie.
I think that was done on purpose, though. I think that was supposed to be like weird, because no one, you know, when he was like talking to his co-pilot and his wife, the co-pilot, he's like, it was the Lord, and then she just goes, praise Jesus. Like no one does that, and if you do that, you're really weird.
People
And
do that.
I feel like that was totally on purpose. I don't think he's pushing any sort of religion. I think it was intentionally supposed to make you be like, okay, what?
It wasn't
Like,
even
are you
just
serious?
them. It was the detective. It was
He
all
goes,
the other
yeah.
people in the movie. They were all talking about God in some way, and I was just here like, do y'all see the heroin?
And that was such an uncomfortable scene too. It's so like robotic and it's just weird. And you feel like he's gonna say something else that just like adds a period, but he never says something. Like he just keeps talking and you're just like, why?
Honestly, I think it makes fun at the fact that when there is a serious incident like that in real life, that all people do is talk about God.
Yeah, and how he is all responsible for it.
Yeah.
I feel like it could also be an interesting statement though on like the different ways people handle these kinds of like terrible, like unbelievable events. You know, like Whip turns to alcohol and drugs and like kind of can't get away from that. And then other people kind of lean into God. And you know, I'm not gonna say that any of them are right or wrong. But I do think that's an interesting point that they lean so hard into that. And because he could have easily been like, I was the co-pilot, I was sitting in the front seat, I know what you did or didn't do, like this is on you. But he kind of puts that on God and is like, I'm not mad at you, like this was preordained, this was meant to happen, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I was really not uncomfortable, but you could tell at the beginning of the movie that their relationship was really weird. Like they're very different people. The way that his co-pilot looks at him even prior to that whole incident was almost like he was holding back, and everything he looked at or his face expressions whenever Whip would say something, he would almost seem like on the inside he would be kind of questioning it. So that character was really interesting as a whole.
I feel like I was so weirded out when the lawyer guy, was like, I got them to write down act of God as a reason. It's like, would any committee like of investigators ever do that?
I
You
don't
know,
think so.
whether or not they believed in it, like you can't like just put it down to that in
At
like,
least not an incident like that, like where
no,
clearly
no, you
there's
can't.
evidence. of toxication or of intoxication among
would have
women.
just asked for a retest or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Because
also,
they
like-
take more than one blood sample from the like same day so that they can test it multiple times. So they would have just tested it again with a new machine.
Yeah, there was a lot of like not good coincidences, but lots of coincidences with that whole thing of like, oh, well, they tested him, but it was on the wrong machine and all this stuff. Like, I feel like if this was a real thing, there wouldn't have been that many perfect things that come together to then get to just toss that whole report out.
But I think that's what the movie is really trying to say. It's like it really was left up to God because there's so many coincidences that it had to be something else controlling it.
Yeah, I can see that.
What
Honestly,
did you
that's
guys
all
think
the
about
movie.
the presentation of addiction, like compared to other movies that you guys have seen that are about addiction? Did you guys think that it was quote unquote accurate, inaccurate, exaggerated,
I think it was very accurate.
Yeah,
Not the
me too.
heroin addiction one, because I know that girl was not going to give up her heroin addiction that fast.
The denial was so accurate
Mm-hmm.
for me, at least. I think that they did a really good job, or Denzel did a really good job at conveying what it's actually like, to like deep down know that you have a problem, but
The lying, the like
yeah,
lying to yourself, everything that they were talking about with lies, like alcoholics being so good at lies and everything, like it made me feel like he did have an addiction,
mhm.
or at least knew what it was like to have one, to act it out that perfectly.
Yeah, and that part where he's outside the like the plain barn, and he's like, I choose to drink. Like, I don't like I choose this and it's okay because I choose to drink and all of this. And like you know that this isn't a choice that he's making. You know that this is beyond him. But the fact that he keeps telling himself that over and over again, like he's trying to convince her and he's trying to convince himself that he's in control of himself and he just isn't, and that it's just so hard to see that because he knows and you know, but he just keeps struggling through it anyway.
Right at the end, where he had that vodka bottle and he put it back down on the top of the fridge, and then I was like, yes, thank God, you finally realized your wrongs. And he's like, haha, psych.
Mhm.
It got me so good. I was like, why? I thought everything was gonna be okay. And then in my head, I was like, maybe it will just be the one. But it's never just the one. It's the entire fridge. Because when they came back in the morning, the fridge was on the floor.
Yeah, as soon as that door was unlocked, I knew it was going downhill from there.
And I think for me, I'm like watching movies about addiction. You hear people say, you know, a lot of people don't realize that it actually is a disease. And I think that this movie, once you watch it until the end, you kind of realized why it's a disease and how it literally takes over every single aspect of your life. Whether, like, obviously it's not healthy and in your mind it's a disease, but I think that they did a really good job at showing how it could literally make everything else in your life just crumble. So that for me was really interesting to see, only because you see him literally go to jail at the end of it, and then it ends with his son coming, and you can tell that their relationship has gotten better, but it will never be the same.
But has the relationship really gotten better? Because the story that his son was writing for his college essay was about learning about someone that you
Person,
don't know.
yeah,
You know, that's supposed to be
good
his
point.
father. He's supposed to know his father.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just bring up quickly something I would like to list? Something that really bothered me in this movie. So, I like the Rolling Stones, but oh my God, they kept using the same Rolling Stones songs that are in every friggin' movie, and I was like, stop using these songs. Stop using, was it like Sympathy for the Devil and whatever, and like the ones you always hear in movies. It drove me nuts. I'm sorry. Every single time John Goodman showed up, I was like, I swear to God, they're gonna be playing more the same like overplayed Rolling Stones songs. I was like, they couldn't come up with something just a little bit more original. That was just something that a little tiny detail that irked me. I don't know why.
Do you know if Denzel has like I don't think he has history of addiction, but does he know anyone, or like did he have someone in his life?
Let me check.
Because that also, I felt like a lot of it, that's what I got. I was like, I felt like he's known someone as opposed to him actually having it. Because you could, I don't know, that's just what I got in his interactions with other people.
I want to mention that I feel like the lady, the heroin addict lady, could have been replaced by the guy with cancer, and he would have probably been more interesting as
Mm.
a
I didn't like the guy with cancer.
what?
He scared me.
Yeah, I mean he was, but like, oh my god, that was my favorite scene in the movie.
I think
I
it's
was
because I have
like,
a
He was
fear
a
of
good character
cancer, but
though.
like,
yeah,
he
he
scared
was
me.
like,
Like the
I
way he
felt,
talked
yeah, that
cracked
actor
me up.
was so good as
He was
that.
so
This like
okay with dying.
this like crazy like self-destructive thing. That was like the biggest part of this movie to me. This movie is about like self-destruction, just completely destroying your life.
Okay, so all it says is that he's a devout Christian and has even considered becoming a preacher,
Wow.
but it doesn't say anything about addiction, but he does
Really?
read the Bible daily. So
Really?
he
That's funny
does.
because his
Um,
character in this movie seemed kind of not about it.
Yeah,
He
not
he
at
he did
all.
not seem like he really cared about religion or anything.
Mhm. But I think that was the whole point, right? Like when you're in that state of mind, you like not only don't, but you literally can't. You don't have room for it because once you do,
he has had an addiction past.
what?
Yes, according to dirtyceleblaundry.com.
Oh.
Could be a lie. Complete lie.
That just sounds like another version of MTV.
Yeah, but they're saying that he had a huge drinking and weed addiction, has done a bit of cocaine in the past, and that it took him feeling like hell, beaten and worn out to change. And that his wife had no luck helping him for a while.
It's so sad. Well, that can add on to the whole concept of star image, right? Like those who know that,
Mm-hmm.
like obviously we didn't know that, but I'm sure if we knew that before going into this movie and watching it, our perspective would have been completely different only on the character of Whip. You know, because I had a lot of trouble connecting to him as a character because everything he did, I was just like, why? I know that he couldn't have helped it, but it was just like you could tell that he wanted to change and he just didn't. So
And I feel like that was because the whole time I was trying to think, like, why Denzel Washington? Like, they could pick any actor to play this character. And I feel like, at least in the beginning part, I felt like what was so important was that, like, we know Denzel Washington, and I felt like I, like, trust him. Like, I don't know. And so when he was doing these things, like getting on the plane after not sleeping and drinking all night and doing a line of cocaine, I was still like, okay, but like we know Denzel, like he's a good guy, like he's gonna be okay. Like I trust him, I know him, and I feel like I've had more confidence in him, in his abilities to land the plane and get them out safe, than I would have if it had been some random actor that I didn't know.
yeah,
Uh,
I mean, he's associated with characters who are represented by grace and dignity and humanity, right? Like if we've seen any other Denzel Washington movie, that's normally the character that he plays. So it definitely makes sense. And I found myself feeling that way too, where it was almost like, why? And I also checked the date of this movie in relation to his other movies that were released. And it's just like in the middle where this was like the one character for me out of the movies that I've seen, at least, where it was just not the case.
Usually in movies, he's like well put together. Like
Yeah.
I think it was Shadows that we all watched, and he was like the head of the detective, and he was extremely smart and knew exactly what he had to do to like figure out the crimes and everything. But in this movie, it's like he's really smart, but street smart, not
Mhm.
education smart, not knowing the right thing to do, and really struggling with himself and knowing who he is. And I feel like there was a lot of trauma probably with his own father
Mhm.
that he was battling with, and that's probably what led him to start drinking, and then it just took control of his life.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We kind of already touched on this, but his range, like I said, always the character around dignity, humanity, grace.
He's
So
always in
this
action movies, though. That's what I've seen, and this is
that
still an
is true.
action movie, but it's not the same kind of action movie. He's usually in like the gun violence or
Yeah.
stuff like that, where you're
But he's
seeing
always
people.
the good guy. He's
Yes,
always the good guy, never the bad guy. And I don't know if it's because he can't act as a bad guy, but I just think because of this, like because we're used to that, if we saw Denzel as a bad guy, we'd be like, what is going on? And we would expect for him to like low key in the end have a twist and be the good guy, you know?
He's a bad guy in Training Day.
that is true.
I've never seen that movie.
Yeah,
It's a
he's
great
like a
movie.
crooked cop. He's like a real scumbag in that movie.
I think
Did he fake being good at first?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, so at some point I feel like he's always like
He's always good at some point.
good guy,
No,
yeah.
but I don't feel like he's a bad person in this movie because it's
He
not
just needs
his
help.
fault.
Like that was so real of it, right? Like they never really are bad people. It's just the way that their lives carry out and then where they are within a given circumstance causes them to just go to, you know, drugs or alcohol or whether that be gambling or whatever addiction it is, you know.
yeah. And I think like when I think Denzel Washington, I always think of The Equalizer. Um, I don't know why that movie in particular, but
I love that
I
movie.
I feel like that's another example of like a protagonist like I feel like he does well with like flawed protagonists. Like they're good guys, but sometimes they do the right thing by doing not great things.
But in this movie, he is a flawed protagonist because we kind
Exactly.
of want him to succeed in the end and like get away with it. But I'm also still happy with the fact that he went to prison. Like I'm not mad at that. He
Yeah.
kind of needed to. It
I feel
like made him a better person.
he's
Mhm.
almost like an anti-hero. I don't know if this is the correct use of that. Where it's like you don't want him to get away with it and you want like you know that what he's doing is wrong and you want him to kind of be held accountable for that, but you still like him and want him to be okay.
I think he's the perfect definition of like an anti-hero.
Yeah. And it especially depends on how you look at it, right? Like every single person that watches this movie is different, and whether that where you can relate to it personally or where you can relate to in whatever way you can. Like I feel like that definition is 100% applicable.
There's something that kind of confused me in this movie that I just wanted to bring up real quick. They keep going on and on about how he was like under the influence while he was on the plane, but no matter what, he's still the only guy who could have pulled it off. So
No,
why
but
did
it's
they
about
waste
money.
what?
Everything's about money. They want to put the blame on someone other than that airline. The
True.
airline doesn't
Yeah.
want to lose any money, so they rather put someone in prison and say, "Oh, he's the real reason that 4 people died." They also didn't care about the 2 stewardess, but
Yeah, they don't count, he said. That was so bad.
That's so rough.
I think it's also though like no one wants to get on a plane and find out afterwards that their pilot was drunk and like high on cocaine. And so like yeah, like he did a really good job, but like that's not to say he wouldn't have handled it well if he hadn't been drunk and high and like he still shouldn't have been going to work like that either way. And like it's shitty that they felt the need to try to drag him through the mud for it, but also like
he
you can't
needed to
just
be dragged through the mud for it.
yeah.
I mean, the way I look at it is that he's really lucky that it just happened to be a crash where only 4 people died when he was that intoxicated. You know what I mean? Like, God forbid if anything else were to happen, where it could have been the entire plane, including himself. So I totally understand where, like, yes, he was the only person that could have done it, and yes, he pulled it off. But I think part of the whole intentional aspect of that was that it like was that incident, and because only a few people like died, he was just left in the hole that obviously he dug himself, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
I
the way
think
I see it.
yeah, and going back to Sully, I don't know if I know Neil has seen it. I don't know if either of you have seen it, but that's a true story. And in that one,
What's
it's
the premise? Like,
so it's Tom Hanks, and he's playing this pilot who they're flying, and a bird gets into the engines, and so they lose an engine. And so he decides
That's
that
what
he
happens.
What?
That's what happens in that movie?
In Sully?
A bird goes in the engine?
Yeah, they hit like a flock of birds or something, right?
I didn't even know they flew that high. That's crazy.
I don't
I
know.
could be wrong. I know nothing about birds, but go ahead, Amanda.
But so then he decides that he can't make it to any of the nearby airports, and so he lands the plane in the river. And everyone survives. Like everyone on the plane is totally fine, walks away, and it's all good. But this all happens in the first half an hour of the movie, and then the whole rest of the movie is him having to go through all of these trials because everyone, like, they had to hold him accountable for doing that and for ruining the plane. And they were like, well, you could have made it to the airport and you could have done something different. You didn't have to do that. And you potentially could have drowned all of these people. And for what? Um, and he literally didn't, no one got hurt. Everyone was okay. And they ended up figuring out that in all of these, they did the simulators and he couldn't have made it to the airport. And he did do the right thing, but they still had to put him through the rigmarole and no one even got hurt in that case. So it makes sense that um, Whip would have to go through all of that, especially because people got hurt. But it's still frustrating. And it's also, I think it's interesting to compare the two movies because, you know, one of the things Manon said to think about was like, how does race play into this? And I do think it's interesting that we have Denzel Washington playing this character and then Tom Hanks and kind of comparing and contrasting the two. I don't know.
I feel like when it comes to the race part with this movie in particular, you don't feel that Denzel Washington is a bad guy because in society, especially in Hollywood, when they have like the 3 black actors that they choose to use and they always have them as good roles, everyone just sees them as good people all the time suddenly. So they don't see him as a bad person. They're like, oh yeah, we still trust him to fly the plane. Like Denzel's a good guy. There's nothing gonna go wrong here. So
Which is this whole concept of star image, right? Like
yeah.
that's a really good point. And even the lawyer, I don't know what the actor's name is, but he is in Iron Man.
So many movies.
Don Cheadle.
But who doesn't love him? You know what I mean? Like when you see him, you're like, oh.
Honestly, when I saw him, I was like, yes, another one.
That's exactly how I felt. And I immediately thought about Iron Man and I was like, I love this guy, you know? So, and of course he was a lawyer. That was this guy that just wanted everyone to, you know, everything to work out. So, as far as the recognition goes, I think yes, Denzel, but also the director. Like before this had come out, he had come out with so many movies, like Forrest Gump being one of them, Castaway being another. And obviously when you hear a movie coming out, you're like, yeah, let's look at the director first and then you look at the cast. At least that's how I go about determining how good a movie's going to be. Not to mention that he had also directed Back to the Future, Death Becomes Her, Jordana. So I feel like it was only reasonable for you to go into this movie having high expectations, which I think carries over onto Denzel's part, where obviously if you think, okay, Zemeckis casted Denzel, so obviously he was perfect for this role. So that was a huge part for me when I had looked up the director and I was like, oh wow, he has a lot on his resume. So
what I think is interesting with the kind of promotion aspect of the movie, I would share my screen, but I don't know what happens when I share screen and we're recording, how that works.
It's gonna pop up with the recording. It's fine.
Okay. So I think it's interesting because so they could have chosen any number of images for the movie poster. But when I looked up the poster, this is the only one I could really find. And they choose this image of Denzel Washington looking very regal and with, you know, the light shining on him. And it's this very dramatic, very powerful image. And, you know, they could have picked the picture of him laying on the floor with his mouth open so he doesn't choke on his own vomit. And that would have put off a very different image of what this film was about. But it definitely looks like when they were promoting that they were making him out to be this powerful hero. And I don't know. I think that also probably leads to us wanting to trust him and wanting him to succeed.
If I'm being honest, I've seen this movie cover so many times. It was on Netflix. I was literally just about to say that, yeah. I've seen this so many times. Every time I looked at it, I was like, oh, it's another like flying movie where they're like going off to war or something, and I don't want to watch that. I literally dreaded this assignment. And I was like, I really have to sit here and watch one of these movies.
Well, that's how I felt. Like, and then once Hugh in class was like, this is about a pilot who has addiction, I had no idea. I thought this was going to be kind of like Air Force One, where maybe it was like a hijacked plane or there was some kind of issue with the actual plane itself and everything going on in the plane, you know? And so that's what I thought. And I kind of, you guys know the movie Triple X with Vin Diesel? That's the other, like, that's what I thought, because I was like, I've never seen that movie, but I always remembered the movie poster only because it's so memorable. And it was the same thing, like when I had read about what that movie was about, it wasn't what I expected, you know? So I thought that was really interesting. I'm glad that you brought that up, Amanda.
I love that though. I love that the movie poster kind of like makes you think something other than what you're getting, because I feel like a lot of like the time these days is like the Netflix trailer for a movie gives away the entire movie, or like the 30-second trailers that they have right before a YouTube video. They're just showing you the main important part. They'll be like, and this is who killed her, and I'm like, they're giving away the entire movie in these 30 seconds. But Flight, like their cover page, showed nothing about the movie other than the main character.
I agree with that, but I feel like that's kind of inadvertent. Like they did that by accident, because that poster, I kind of hate it. I feel like it's just so, like, the producers decided that would be the poster. You know, it doesn't tell you anything about the movie. I saw it and I was like, this looks just like Sully, that boring biopic, whatever we've seen a million, inspiring story, really, you know, like that kind of crap. And I was like, yeah, this looks like kind of lame. You know, talk about judge a book by its cover. I do it all the time. And then like I was like not excited to see this movie, but because of that, it did subvert my expectations totally when things actually like started to go wrong. And I was like totally taken out of left field. I was like, oh, I thought this was gonna be like some, you know, sappy biopic or something like that, but
Yeah. I just Googled it, and the Sully poster is literally basically the exact same thing.
yeah.
And it's just Tom Hanks like
Share
on
the
a
screen.
stormy back. So like that's basically the exact same thing, but then plus the plane. But it's
When did this
stormy
movie come
background.
out? When did this movie come out? He looks so old.
I think
That was on purpose. I mean, but Denzel like being in this movie made more people go and see it.
Yeah,
You know, it's like having such a big name person in the movie. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have watched it if it wasn't Denzel. Like even with the assignment, I'd be like, oh, what's that? But Denzel really makes it more enjoyable to watch because you're like, wow, this guy is such an amazing actor, and I've seen him in Equalizer and Equalizer 2 and like 30 other movies. So
Well, and hearing that he's going to play a pilot who has an addiction, like I feel like people would be really interested to see how his performance varies from that movie as opposed to another movie like Equalizer or Inside Man or something like that. So
did the advertisements for this movie talk about his addiction at all?
I'm sure if you watch like the trailer, right, you would get that idea.
But
I haven't seen the trailer.
I feel like that might be something that they could have hidden. That way it shocks more people.
That's
Because it's
true.
not usually something that Denzel would do in a movie. Because a lot of people did know him as like that devout Christian. So like I understood the God stuff that he threw in there probably was his own touch. He was like, no.
I was gonna say, yeah.
But the addiction, that's not usually something we'd see.
They do bring up his addiction in the trailer.
What did you guys think about seeing the rest of the cast before watching the movie? Because I feel like most of these actors are pretty recognizable, right? Like even what was his name? He's in this movie called King Ralph, or I think that's what it's called. But I feel like every actor that we've seen in this movie, you could think or recognize them from a different movie or just from something else. So I thought that for me.
Nicole from anything, but
other than Nicole. But like the lawyer, and then even Charlie, like I felt like I have seen him from somewhere.
He was in the Star Trek movie.
Yeah, see, so I feel like also like on top of the director, John Goodman, that was his name, the guy who played Harling. And then Don Cheadle, obviously Bruce Greenwood. And then Tamara Tooney. Anyone here watch SVU?
This is actually out of like character for Kelly Riley, which is Nicole, because I'm looking at her other movies and I'm saying Pride and Prejudice and Sherlock Holmes. And then that's what
Pride and Prejudice?
Oh, that's right. She was in Sherlock
Yeah.
Holmes.
Pride and Prejudice, the 2005 one.
Yeah.
She's in Sherlock Holmes,
Mm.
the 2009, 2011. So
Yeah.
I think it was different for her. We've been focusing so much on Denzel Washington, we forgot about Nicole, and how this is completely out of pocket for Kelly.
John Goodman cracked me up because I associate him. He's in a Christmas movie I love the Coopers. If you haven't seen it, it's very cute. But he's like the cute, like loving grandpa in that movie, and he just like wants everyone to like get along and like be friends on Christmas. And so then to see him go from that to being the like cocaine providing friend was that was quite a. And so I don't know what his like niche is in Hollywood or whatever. And so I don't know whether that was off casting or not. But
I
for
think
me,
it's
it
I
felt
wouldn't say it's off casting for him, but he's been in media for so long since he was in the Flintstones.
the
So
voice,
it's
yeah.
like
And Monsters Inc. too. Like I
Mhm.
think a lot of it has to do with his voice. Like his voice for this role was like this crazy guy who was this drug distributor who was like off his rails, obviously, but just a little bit there to where he could still distribute,
yeah.
consciously. And I think his voice was a lot of it. He's really obnoxious, and everything like that. So I personally think that he was a great role, and his like big, like physical appearance too.
His
With like
voice
every
really suits him,
yeah, it does.
honestly.
And that scene where he comes up to them, and it's when right before Denzel's supposed to go in front of the board to be asked all these questions, and they find him like really drunk and messed up in the hotel, and he like comes up and shows up with his cocaine. Like even the way he comes to the door, like the way he walks up, and his voice like, "Hey, like I'm Harling," it's perfect.
I feel like it works in character for him. Like
Mhm.
the way that he acts, especially like he is one of those kind of like Meryl Streep actors where it's like you can really see him in anything and he'll do a great job playing that
It's
role.
funny.
Because he does a great job with voice acting. He does a great job with playing, cocaine dealer, playing the old grandpa. Like he can do a lot of things, and we won't see it as something that he's, not capable of doing. But with Denzel, it's like you always just see him as a good person, and then seeing him playing someone that you would take the way that society puts it, it's like you would typically see that person as a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think he's a good person, and that's just me.
I feel like Denzel Washington kind of plays a variation on himself, kind of
Mm.
like because if you see him in Training Day or in what's that gangster movie he's in? Um, sorry, give me a second. I want to find out the name of this movie. Yeah, I mean, he's an American Gangster too. And if you've seen, I haven't seen the whole movie, but if you see
He's
like
always the good guy.
little like clips of him, he's like in all of his movies, he's like really, he's kind of this confident, kind of sort of intense kind of guy. He's like whenever he's like talking to anyone in a movie, he's like very engaged with them. He's always like, very much kind of in control of like the conversation. And he's like that in almost everything. He's got this air about him. And I feel like kind of each movie he's in is in like a different variation of that. That's not like a bad thing. Like in this one, he's this like addicted guy, whose life is falling apart, but he's still got that intensity that he always has. In Training Day, he's this like scummy cop who, is like a should be put in jail, but he's still got that exact same kind of attitude. And then same thing with American Gangsters, like this criminal, mobster, but he's still got that exact same like cadence and intensity that he always has. I feel like that's kind of his thing.
Mm-hmm. So I think as far as the dirty laundry
One of my games.
of Denzel, obviously Jordana brought up his addiction. But I feel like because of his character in movies where he's always the good guy or he's always this insightful person who focuses on dignity and humanity. You know, you don't really think about that, or at least you wouldn't expect it if you were someone that didn't know about it. And even for people like us, like when I heard Jordana say that, it really didn't change the way I saw him. It didn't really change the way that I feel about him as an actor or a person. I don't know him personally, obviously, but to a certain extent, I feel like anyone who watches someone else's movies, like you feel like you do. So I don't know about you guys, but that really didn't affect me at all. Whereas, like, I heard Emma Roberts bit Evan Peters the other day, and I'm like,
she bit
what?
Evan Peters?
Yeah, did you not see that? So apparently, and I looked it up, Evan Peters and Emma Roberts, less than a year into their relationship, they got into a physical fight, and the cops came, and the reason why they arrested Emma Roberts is because Evan Peters had bite marks on him.
Okay, and they could have been doing something else before the physical fight.
Change the way that you think of Emma Roberts, because we grew up with her, like what Nancy Drew, and then we see her in American Horror Story. We're like, what? You know, like she's this crazy person. So I feel like for me, like when I guess the younger a star is, yes, sure, but yeah, right. Like,
I love Emma Roberts. Honestly, respect.
She's notorious for
like
being.
How it changes that quickly. Because when I found that out, I was like, what? Like, I don't know.
She's kind of notorious for being really, really difficult on sets of shows.
Yeah.
She'll like start screaming at people when they're working with them, and that is not okay.
That isn't.
Same thing with Christian Bale. Christian Bale does that.
What do you call Batman when he leaves church? Christian Bale.
Oh my god! Wow.
Okay, my quote is from David Eldstein from the New York from just New York Mag. No actor is as brilliant or cunning as Denzel Washington at portraying superhuman coolness and the scary prospect of its loss.
Very nice. So mine is from the New York Times. And so mine says, Mr. Zemeckis, the director, directing his best movie since Castaway about a different kind of disaster, makes you see that Whip is a beautiful indulger, as does the erotically hyped up Mr. Washington with his switchblade strut and aviator shades. As crucially, they also show you the ugly, mean, angrily unrepentant drunk, the one whose sunglasses hide bloodshot eyes and who, when he passes out on the floor, needs someone to tilt his head so he doesn't choke on his own vomit.
So this one says, Washington gives what is nothing less than a performance of a lifetime in this tension-filled film dealing with a pirate wrestling with inner demons. And I just found that interesting only because of what we've been talking about on how, like, this was so separate from what he's normally used to, and this whole battle with inner demons, on how it was difficult for us to, like, actually connect with the character. Although we saw it, it was still really hard for me to actually, like, kind of step into the shoes of someone who was actually there.
I picked a quote from the movie. This is probably my favorite one. This is probably the one a lot of people picked up on. It is when he's in prison. And he says, "This is going to sound real stupid coming from men in prison, but for the first time in my life, I'm free." And I thought that was like probably that was just a great way to kind of round off his kind of journey to eventually ending up in prison. And I think that kind of, I don't know, it just resonates with me.
Him being in prison honestly made everything else in his life so much easier. Because he wasn't like stuck with a bunch of like triggers everywhere he looked, you know, and he could actually focus on getting better.
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. All right.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.
Okay, cool.
Perfect.